Hello, everyone, and we'll be getting started with our latest webinar in our global webinar series. Today, we'll be covering passive components for AC mains power conversion. My name is Wilmer Compagnoni, and I'll be your host for today's webinar. Our presenter today is Pranjal Srivastava, and we've got a lot of good content to get to. We'll, before we hand it off to Pranjal, I'd like to remind everybody that if you have any questions, please submit them through the Q&A portion of the Zoom window. And as soon as Pranjal is done with his presentation, we'll address those questions at that time. So without further ado, I know we have some good content to get to. So Pranjal, at your leisure, my friend.
Thanks, Wilmer. Well, hi, everyone. My name is Pranjal Srivastava. I'm the field application engineer here at Kemet Electronics, and I'm responsible for the region of Central Europe. Prior to joining Kemet, I have 4 years of design and development experience as a hardware engineer at various automotive tier 1 and tier 2 suppliers. And before that, I hold a master's degree in microsystems engineering from University of Freiburg, Germany. So that would be it from my personal side of things. Now let's move on to the agenda at hand. These are the topics to be covered today. The agenda follows the regular sequence of electronic modules as and when an electric signal enters a device. We start first with passives for EMI filtering, followed by AC harmonic filtering. And once we are sure that our signal is noise-free, then we have a look at passives for power factor correction plus AC-DC conversion, so that a smooth DC signal is made available to the end load or the actual device. So let's have a look at the basic block diagram for AC mains power extraction. No matter what device you use at your homes or at your work, they all have this basic sequence of electronic blocks. The AC main signal is firstly cleaned, made noise-free, and then supplied to the AC DC stage. So let me get my mouse here and I change it to laser pointer. So yes, the AC main signal is firstly cleaned, made noise-free, and then supplied to the AC DC stage, which then converts it into a smooth DC waveform to be processed further by subsequent stages. So Z here represents the load impedance. No matter what device you're using and no matter what socket type you use, this basic electronic block diagram or the theoretical principles behind this basic block diagram remain the same. And it's mainly the end load impedance and also the DC-DC or the inverter block here, which might change. And then this has an impact back here. But all in all, from outside, this is how the block diagram looks like. So we start first with EMI plus AC line filtering. I've taken the example here of a home dryer or maybe of a washing machine, as you may call it. And when we plug our washing machine or a home dryer into your AC main socket, in an ideal environment, we expect a perfect looking sinusoidal waveform, like what you see here on your screens. This is devoid of any distortions. This is devoid of any sort of disturbances. And this is why if we have an ideal world, then we can skip this EMI filtering part on the PCB board and actually supply our load impedance directly from the AC main socket. But fortunately for companies like Kemet, this is not really an ideal world where we live in. The AC main signal which comes into your device is usually always filled with a lot of distortions, with a lot of unexpected transients and harmonic interferences, which you actually are not well aware of. Because the load impedance does not get to see these harmonic interferences or these voltage transients because of this EMI filter block, this EMI plus AC harmonic filter block. And this is why in a real scenario, unless you have this filtering block here, you would not be able to effectively drive your load here. And this is going to be the main focus of this webinar for the next half an hour. So why EMI filtering is needed? Well, to make the end device immune to high frequency transients coming from AC mains network, and to make the AC mains network immune to high frequency transients coming back from device to AC mains. So not only is the filtering block preventing inward flow of disturbances, but in many cases also prevents an outward flow of disturbances. The key term here is conducted emissions or conducted immunity, as this filter plus EMI block is usually more effective against conducted and radiated as compared to radiated disturbances or to radiated immunity. Now, before we move on to passive components to design an EMI solution, it's necessary to understand the EMI noise types that are needed to be filtered out by these components. EMI noise amplitude against frequency could look similar to what you see as a blue curve on your screen here. Before understanding how to get away with this noise, because this just looks like some random noise with different amplitudes at different frequencies, we need to understand what is this noise really composed of. So let's go back to the basics. So if we happen to have, let's say, some sort of a magical interference splitter device, so we could effectively and essentially convert this noise waveform into its constituent waveforms, then we would be left with a curve like what you see here. The red curve here represents differential mode or asynchronous disturbances, and the gray curve here represents common mode or synchronous disturbances. And how to get rid of common mode. So if we then consider each of these waveforms individually. So as a design engineer, my main aim would be that all the differential mode noise that I'm getting in this specific frequency range, so in this case, let's say between 15 kilohertz or 150 kilohertz to around about 500 kilohertz, this for me is the troubling area, because this is where I come close to the limits as are specified by the requirements. And similarly for common mode interferences, I'm coming close to the limits in this frequency range. And for me as a design engineer, the main aim has to be to remove common mode noise or synchronous noise in this frequency range and differential mode noise in this frequency range. If I select a component that is giving me differential mode impedance in this frequency range and common mode impedance in this frequency range, or maybe this frequency range, then my money is not worth it. I've not paid for a device that is really going to help me. So a careful selection of the material, of the passive component based on the frequency is the key to really tuning and designing your EMI filter circuit. The well-known ways of removing synchronous noise or synchronous disturbances is a common mode choke and a Y capacitor. And the passive electronic elements needed for removing asynchronous noise is typically either a differential mode choke or an X capacitor. Now let's look more in detail of where are these X and Y caps and common mode chokes connected. So this is a typical two-stage EMI filter circuit. An X capacitor is typically connected between two lines or line in neutral, because a synchronous noise or synchronous noise usually occurs between a line and ground. So let's say if there is a disturbance which is conducted through your main ground or through your main chassis into all your line and neutral signals, then it would not be possible for you to differentiate or remove noise unless you actually connect a capacitor between that line and ground or chassis. And similarly, if you have asynchronous noise or noise between two line or line and neutral signal, then you can effectively filter out noise by connecting a capacitor between these two lines. So this is why the elements here in blue are representative of asynchronous noise or asynchronous noise removers, I'm sorry, yes, and the elements in red are responsible for the removal of synchronous noise or common mode noise. And common mode noise is called a synchronous noise, or common mode noise is called synchronous noise, typically because all the lines are affected because of that noise. And this is why there's a synchronicity between different lines if you happen to read their EMI interferences. Along with the common mode, or along with the Y capacitor, there is also typically a common mode choke, which is supplementing the filtering behavior of a Y capacitor. And similarly, there's also a differential mode choke, which is complementing the behavior, which is supplementing the behavior of an X capacitor. Although in this case, you see here just one choke for the first stage and one choke for the second stage, there typically is a common mode choke plus a differential mode choke. Why we have shown here only one capacitor, only one choke? Well, that's because here at Kemet we have a special type of a choke which we call as a hybrid choke. And using this choke, you do not actually need two different, one common mode and one differential mode choke, but you can actually only use one hybrid mode choke. And this hybrid mode choke is guaranteed to help you out with both kind of insertion losses. So let's try and understand how a hybrid choke mode is, or a hybrid mode choke is designed, and what makes it different from a common mode choke. But for us to understand that, we need to understand first how a common mode choke works and how a differential mode choke works. So a differential mode choke is nothing but simply a ring, but simply a core material, which looks something like this ring, what you see here, and there's wire wound around it. So if there is any disturbances, or if there is any disturbance in this electrical signal here, then this disturbance or this change or this high frequency, or whatever the frequency of that disturbance would be, would create a changing electric field that would create a magnetic field here in this core material. So the electric signal or the electrical energy at those frequency would be transferred into magnetic energy, which would then be ultimately lost in the form of heat. And this is how a simple differential mode choke, or this is basically how simply an inductor works. You have a changing electric field, which induces then a magnetic field. So your electrical energy at those frequency is lost, and you have a reduction in the amplitude of interferences at those frequency. And this is why we call this term as an insertion loss. And this is how a differential mode choke creates an insertion loss in your AC mains network. Now, when we move on to a common mode choke, so what is the main difference between a common mode and a differential mode choke? Well, as the figure here suggests, instead of one signal line here, we have two signal lines that are connected in parallel like this in a common mode choke. And how this works is, when you have differential mode or asynchronous noise, then you have noise going to the right on, let's say, on the top wire, and then the same noise comes back. And this direction of noise flow, or this asynchronous noise, creates this magnetic field which essentially cancels itself out. And this is why a common mode choke would never give you any insertion loss for any asynchronous noise that might be there on your circuit. But if there is synchronous noise, so by synchronous noise, I mean noise which is present on both the signal lines. So it's conducted in this direction, let's say on the top line, and in this direction on the bottom line, then this creates this harmonic magnetic field, or this magnetic field which is in the same direction. And this is how this ensures that actually your synchronous disturbances are effectively filtered out using a common mode choke. So the needed magnetic saturation here is only relevant for common mode interference current. And this is how basically a common mode choke works. So how then have we thought about for designing the architecture of a hybrid mode choke, and how is that composed? Well, if we induce a small magnetic path inside a common mode choke, then essentially we have the outer core, which is there for removing synchronous noise, and we have then this magnetic path inside which goes through this small magnetic patch here, and this then leads to differential mode interference. So what this means is that just by introduction of this small magnetic nose, we have created both synchronous insertion loss as well as asynchronous insertion loss. of course, it would not be possible for one choke to give you the desired effect for exactly the frequencies that you need. There are, of course, certain set of, let's say, frequencies both for common mode and differential mode noise, which would be creating the needed insertion noise. But at least we do have, I mean, there is a possibility for us to look into your EMI interferences or your EMI problems, and perhaps there could be a possibility for us to suggest one choke instead of two chokes. Now, how do we realize this, this theoretical knowledge into a practical product? Well, this is how typically a common mode choke looks like, a conventional common mode choke. And if we introduce this magnetic nose in between, then essentially what we have done is we have the outer main core, which is responsible for the removal of your common mode noise, or as it's shown also here. And then, sorry, not this one, but I meant this one. And then on top of that, you have also this small magnetic nose, which leads to these four magnetic paths here, which ultimately leads to also a differential mode impedance. And for us to realize this in a product, well, with the vertical orientation of the bobbins, we have, as you can see, a nose here on this side and a nose here for a horizontal orientation of bobbin. So you have one magnetic field which goes out there, and then we have one field that comes here. So this is how a hybrid mode choke provides the needed impedance for both common mode as well as differential mode noise. This showcases the wide variety of common mode chokes that we have here at Kemet, from small sizes with low current capability to big ones. So here, which could be 3 or 4 phase as well. And then, of course, we have our custom shape or our custom made common mode chokes available. So one of the unique capabilities that we have here at Kemet is that right from the extraction of the core material to its research and development and down to production, we have a complete control over the material and over the production. And what this means is that we of course have a standard product offerings, but for us to design something customer specific by looking at your unique EMI requirements, by what insertion loss you need, at which frequency, and what really is the source of your noise, we can actually also provide some customer specific EMI chokes, which would then cater specifically to your need, which is usually the case in EMI. When you go to an EMI lab, you might have 1 or 2 frequencies where even with the standard products, you're not able to solve or bring the needed insertion loss. And in those cases, we have the needed R&D team, and we have the needed engineers who can look into your specific requirements and then offer you a subsequent product. Now let's move on to role of capacitors in EMI filtering. Let's say we have a line here, which is full of these distortions and these transients. And at the output, we want this beautiful looking sinusoidal waveform to go and feed the load in the washing machine. And this is basically, as I've also explained in the previous slide, this is what the main aim of the EMI filter module is, to be able to output this almost distortion free waveform at the output. The chokes are very essential for removing your noise at certain frequencies. But what happens when you have high frequency transients? What happens when you have high voltage transients, which are also high frequency, and for such transients could even be a little dangerous for your devices. So for the device to be protected against these high voltage, high frequency transients, you use X capacitors between subsequent lines and Y capacitors between line and ground, as we have also discussed on one of the previous slides. And this is basically the reason why we have 2 different classes of safety for a safety capacitor. And this is why safety capacitors are so sought after capacitors typically, which have requirements from IEC that need to be fulfilled, because if there is any, so if there is any failure that happens in any of these capacitors, which could be a reality because you have these high voltage, high frequency transients that could seep in to any of these capacitors. So this could lead at times to, maybe, let's say if you have a failure or you have a short across your X capacitor, this could lead to perhaps a blow of the fuse or fire. Well, in most cases, this leads to a blow of the fuse because you have a fuse connected here typically before an EMI filter module. When there is some transient that goes through, there's this high inrush current which creates then this blowing up of fuse. Fire would be one of the extreme cases when there is no fuse protection present. But in the worst case, yes, this could lead to fire because of the high amount of current that would be flowing through these capacitors. But when it comes to Y capacitors, because they're really dealing with the synchronous noise and they are directly connected to ground or chassis, it becomes a little more safety critical, because if there is a short here, then this electrical signal would be conducted onto ground or chassis, and this would then affect all the other lines in your AC mains network. So if someone comes and happens to touch some part outside the device or some part on the device, and that is connected or has some potential relative to ground, then this could lead to electric shocks. So this is why, from a safety point of view, a class Y capacitor is very, very critical. And there is typically no, you cannot use a fuse like you use in X capacitors to prevent the problem, to prevent the failure, or to prevent a safe, or to ensure a safe failure mode. And this is why a class Y capacitor has to also qualify much tougher qualification standards. This qualification standard is defined by the IEC 60384 norm, where X1, X2, Y1, Y2 are the different safety ratings given to safety capacitors. The safety rating typically depends on the value of the peak voltage. So UP here in this case, the duration and shape of the pulse remains the same, but it's really this peak voltage that then determines if your capacitor, if, for example, your capacitor can withstand this a peak voltage of 8 kilovolts as per this waveform, then it's rated as Y1 grade. And if it can withstand 5 kilovolts, then it's rated as Y2 grade. And similarly for X1 and X2 as differential mode capacitors, as you can say, you have then 4 kilovolts and 2.5 kilovolts respectively. What this also means is that, interestingly, a Y1 capacitor can be used also as a Y2 capacitor and also as an X2 and X1 capacitor. This is because Y1 capacitor is the safest capacitor that is out there in the market. So all the safety requirements for an X capacitor are easily also fulfilled then with a Y capacitor. And this is, but this also does not mean that we have in every case you can use a Y capacitor in the place of an X capacitor, just because you have more requirements, so you can buy more and more Y capacitor, and instead of buying two different components, your then volume requirement for each year significantly goes up because you're buying 2 times the same Y capacitor, and then this becomes maybe more price effective for you. But this does not usually happen, and this is simply because the X capacitor gives you way many capacitance values to select from. This is because the voltage withstandability of an X capacitor is not as high as a Y capacitor. Because the voltage withstandability of Y capacitor has to be significantly higher than an X capacitor, this is one of the main reasons why the Y capacitors typically are lower value capacitors as compared to X capacitors. And therefore, in most of the cases, your X capacitor capacitance requirement would not be able to be fulfilled by a Y capacitor. And this is one of the main reasons why this is not usually the case, that only Y capacitors are there in the market and not X capacitors. And of course, then it would also be cheaper to make a smaller size X capacitor than to make a big size Y capacitor for all of your requirements. Now, this is our film safety capacitor product catalog summary, if you can call it. Of course, we have even more polypropylene-based safety capacitors in our product portfolio. But these capacitors really are our focus products for now. And as you can see, our main focus or our main direction of improvement with our film safety capacitors really has been harsh environment and harsh temperatures. Because of the material qualities, or because the material properties of polypropylene, the high temperature behavior and harsh environment behavior traditionally has been a bit of a challenge, but our R&D has made some materials with, has made some improvements, some innovation with the material itself. And of course, then also the way we encapsulate our safety capacitors, which ultimately leads to its promised safety performance also in harsh environments and also at high temperatures. For example, our latest R41T Y capacitor, this capacitor has a operating temperature range up to 125 degrees Celsius. And the same applies to our new upcoming or the new version of the R46X capacitor that would be coming up, where we also have temperature capability up to 125 degrees Celsius. And when I mean harsh environment, I typically mean F862 and F863 capacitors. These capacitors have a 85% humidity, 85 degrees Celsius environmental specification to work up to Y500 and 1000 hours respectively, which is of course also the requirement of the AEC Q norm. And this is really what has been the direction of our focus for R&D in our safety gaps since last few quarters. What you would find missing here is maybe a Y1 capacitor, because I've listed here only X1, X2, and Y2 capacitors. Well, this is because here at Kemet, we presently only offer Y1 capacitor with the impregnated paper technology, which is very different from polypropylene in many ways. And because it's different, it also means that it is a bit more expensive than the polypropylene based capacitors. And this is why this is not really one of the products that you would want to use in your consumer electronic segments, because Y1 capacitor typically is more expensive, but in terms of safety, an impregnated paper based capacitor is much more safe due to excessive self-healing and many other properties as compared to a polypropylene capacitor. But again, it would be more bulky, it would be more expensive. And this is why it's not really part of this presentation here. Apart from film safety capacitors, we have also ceramic safety capacitors. So the C900 and ER safety disc capacitors have been there for some time now. We have also Y1 rated ceramic safety disc capacitors. So if you have requirement for a Y1 safety capacitor, and you do not find something from our film capacitors or something which is cost effective from our film capacitors, we of course also have ceramic safety capacitors that might as well do the job for you. The latest addition to our disc capacitors is C700 safety disc capacitor. It is mainly an addition to these two capacitor series that you see, in terms of that, yes, we have more capacitance values that are possible with these capacitors now. And also we have one more lead style that is now possible with the C700 safety disc capacitor. So previously we had only 3 connection styles, and now we have 4 lead and connection styles. The most interesting addition to our safety capacitor, or to our ceramic safety capacitor series, is the CAS safety SMD ceramic capacitor, because the SMD construction type safety capacitors are not something which you'll find a lot in the market. And of course, this was launched by us also towards the end of the last year. So this is also a very new product here at Kemet. We have these SMD capacitors available from sizes 1808 to 2225, and also with X7R and C0G dielectrics. So basically then, depending on what really your requirement is, we could probably offer you a solution also with a with an SMD type safety capacitor. Just a small comment here, along with a safety rated SMD capacitor series, we also launched a non-safety rated SMD MLCC series for other AC usages where you probably do not need in all cases a safety rating. Let's say for a voltage divider application for an LED driver network, for example. So for that, we have launched the CAN series, which could also be an interesting series to look at because that is not safety rated. So the capacitance values that are possible with the CAN series are a lot more than what is there with the safety rated CAS series. Now we move on to AC harmonic filtering. Well, harmonics are defined as positive integer multiples of the fundamental frequency. So depending on what your fundamental frequency is, whether it's 50 Hertz or 60 Hertz, depending on where on earth you are, you would of course also have disturbances in the frequency in its integer multiple frequencies. And this is what AC harmonic filtering does, that as compared to an X or Y capacitor or to a common mode or differential mode, which are essentially dealing with lot higher frequencies or with transients or with voltage peaks, this is really dealing more with harmonics. And why and or what kind of, or what are the reasons why we have these harmonics? Well, we have current harmonics, which might happen due to nonlinear loads such as variable speed drives. Then of course we also have voltage harmonics, which are caused by interaction between current harmonics and source impedance. Usually the current carrying capability of an X or Y capacitor is in most cases not a very critical parameter, but this is not the case with an AC harmonic filter capacitor, because here the capacitor needs to have a high ripple current capability to be able to effectively conduct the harmonics to ground, which is in most cases not the case with an X and Y capacitor. And this is what makes it different, makes it different and unique. So we're looking at harmonic frequencies instead of looking at really high frequencies and transients and so on. These are our two AC harmonic filter capacitor offerings. We have the box type harmonic filter, which is the C4AF series. It's ACQ 200 certified. It's up to a working temperature of 105 degrees Celsius as of now. The focus market, of course, because of the qualification is the automotive or small scale motor drives. And for all your large energy requirements for focus markets such as UPS or renewable energy or heavy industrial systems, we have our CAN type AC filter capacitor series, the C44PF series. The voltage and capacitance offering with this CAN type capacitor series is a lot more than a box type series. And it's also equipped with a safety overpressure device and is also UL 810 qualified. So not as high temperature capable as the automotive grade box capacitor, but is for sure equipped with many safety features, which would be pretty critical, which could be quite critical for any high power applications. Now let's move on to the AC to DC conversion stage. I've taken the example here of a gallium nitride based AC-DC converter plus the boost PFC stage. The intent of this slide is not to dig deep into gallium nitride technology as a rectifier plus an ACD plus a PFC technology, but mainly to focus on the smoothening capacitor CL and the smoothening inductor L1 here. The gallium nitride in most cases as of now is used because of the low losses or because of the low RDS. So in many cases, gallium nitride as of now are not really used up to their full frequency extent. But in case they are used, we have had a couple of good webinars also on those topics. I would really recommend you to have a look at those webinars to look at Kemet offerings for wide bandgap technology. But as of now, I would focus here really on CL and L1. And then let's see what Kemet has to offer for these components, depending, of course, also on the frequency and other parameters. So usually the challenge of power electronics for a power inductor is that materials that can magnetize easily also have low magnetic saturation. So this blue line would be a line well known to anyone who has dealt with magnetics before, most of the materials either lie on the line or below it. Anything above the line is considered sort of revolutionary. So if we have a look here, we have here at Kemet two materials, the nanocrystal material and the nanomet material, which lie above the line. And how does this really help a design engineer? Well, it helps a design engineer because let's say if you select a component like amorphous cobalt for your core material, you have, of course, high permeability. This means you would reach an incredibly high inductance value. But as soon as some current starts to flow through the windings, then because of also lower saturation, what this essentially means is that you would not be left with a lot of inductance. This is very similar to X7R or X5R DC bias effect, where if you have more and more voltage DC bias on the capacitor, then you're not really left with a lot of capacitance towards the end. And this is the same with power inductors. And this is why most of the components that are available that lie below this blue line. But if you have materials that are available and that lie above the blue line, so materials where you get high permeability and also high saturation, then you have sort of an advantage with the trade-off when you're selecting your components. And this is why nanomet and nanocrystalline come in. And nanomet is really our main focus product or main focus material for power inductors, and nanocrystal is more for the EMI for the EMI inductors, like for common mode choke or for a differential mode choke. We presently do not actually have a series on nanomet, or we don't have a standard power inductor series that uses nanomet. We would have something in the middle, towards the middle of next year, but we do have some custom specific reactances and some other customer specific products where the engineer could really use these extra special properties of this material. And one more reason why I have decided to talk about nanomet in this webinar is that our standard inductor offerings as of now are made of Metcom powder, metal composite powder. But I believe there have been many webinars also in the last few weeks which have been focused on Metcom and our standard MPX and MPXV offerings. So I've decided to maybe introduce a new material here. And in case you have any interest in our present power inductor series, and you can have a look at our data sheets or in the past webinars. It's pretty well explained there. The other big challenge of power electronics for the power inductor for L1 or for power inductor material is that materials that have high magnetization capability also typically have high losses. So if you look at amorphous iron, for example, this material has high magnetization capability, but there are also a lot of high losses associated here. And here again, nanomet gives you this advantage in trade-off. So it has high magnetization, but it does not have very high losses. And so if we happen to summarize nanocrystal, amorphous, and nanomet, this is why our focus for power inductors in the future is going to be with the nanomet material, because we don't have high losses, we have high permeability, and we also have high saturation. Lambda S here is the magnetostriction constant, which is an indicative of how easily can the material really saturate. And this is why this would be an interesting product to watch out for in the future. Nanocrystal is, because of this specific reason, used more and more as an EMI choke, simply because of the high losses. So if you have high current going through nanocrystal, then you're expecting high losses. And also the saturation is not as high as for nanomet. So this is the main reason why we use nanomet more and more as a power inductor. Outlook with nanomet. So this is our part, our 10 microhenry offering as of now, with the MPX series, and this is the same part from, or maybe an equivalent part from a competitor. Then I've compared here with an equivalent part number with nanomet in the future when this series would be launched, and how the parameters really compare. And if we have a look at this, the RDC is maybe not that different between the MPX and the nanomet part, which also means that the current leading to 40 Kelvin rise, there's not much of a difference between our part right now and in the future, and the part in the future. But what really gives us the edge is the saturation characteristics, or the high saturation ability of the equivalent nanomet part, because here we have a current capability of 45 amperes as compared to 36 amperes for what we would have for an equivalent part as of now. And even compared to a best competitor, this looks very well placed. And this is the reason why I think this would be also, when we compare it to some of the inductors right now, this would be something sort of semi-revolutionary to watch out for in the future. Last but not the least, just a summary of different capacitors to serve as a smoothening capacitor. So up to 100 volts is not really something which would be interesting for this webinar, because we're really talking about AC-DC conversion for consumer electronics. So AC means you would not expect voltages at the output of a rectifier to be below 100 volts. But above 100 volts, or let's say above 500 volts, would be really the more interesting criteria, because this would really be your voltage requirement for your rectifier output stage. So between 100 volts to 500 volts output rectifier voltage, which could be the case for industrial drives or buffer for industrial ECUs and so on. Here we have almost all the technologies which could be a possible smoothing capacitor solution, except for tantalum or tantalum polymer capacitor. A polymer capacitor or an electrolytic polymer capacitor here is shown with a star, and that's simply because these capacitors have voltage ability till 250 volt DC and not more. So till 250 volts, if you have a requirement, this could be an interesting product to look into. But the real interesting part starts when we need more and more voltage capability. So as we go above 500 volts, then traditionally and typically it's usually been a polypropylene based film capacitor, which has been the choice of the engineers, because the electrolytic capacitors, I mean, if you're using electrolytic technology, then you need to use two in series, and then it's not really the most comfortable solution. But with a single film capacitor, you can have that ability for sure. And of course, the interesting addition here are ceramic capacitors. And this is basically the reason why I've used the gallium nitride example on one of the previous slides, because if the switching frequency is high enough, and if the ripple current requirement is more than, or is more vital than capacitance requirement, then it's really the ripple current per nanofarad of capacitance that becomes the most interesting criteria to look out for. And this is where then the ceramic capacitors, KC link and connect capacitors, become more and more important. They have very high ripple current capability, they have very high temperature capability as well, and of course their only drawback is that they don't have as high capacitance values possible as it could be with film capacitors or with electrolytics. But because of their very superior ripple current capability, they are for sure going to be a very interesting product if the gallium nitride based switches would be used at their full threshold of possible switching frequencies. Because then typically you would not need more than maybe 100, 200 nanofarad. What you would need is high ripple current capability and high temperature capability. This is where then a ceramic based smoothing capacitor would become more and more useful. So this would be then the end of the presentation. If you have any questions, please feel free to ask, or feel free to drop me an email afterwards.
Great. Yeah, thank you, Pranjal. And I know we went kind of long, but we definitely had some good stuff here. And we did get a couple questions come in, so let's get through those quickly since we're a little bit over time. The first question that came in was, it's a bit of a theoretical question, but in a differential mode choke, what would happen if there were no losses in the inductor? Where does the harmonic energy go? I guess this is theorizing about perfect chokes.
Yes, with a differential mode choke, I think the main criteria when it comes to losses really is to minimize the losses at 50 or 60 hertz and to maximize the losses where you really want the frequency to be effectively filtered out. So I don't want my choke to show a lot of losses at 50 or 60 hertz, but let's say if I have a disturbance around 200 kilohertz, then that's where I want my choke to be more and more lossy. So it's again a question of comparing losses against frequency, right? If we really have to talk about the theory of losses and how it depends. So if there is a choke which has no losses at any frequencies, then you might as well replace it with a wire. I mean, because then I'm, I mean, then why would you use a choke? But yes, if you have a choke where you have then changing losses, I mean, an ideal choke is a choke where you have changing losses with changing frequency, and that's what we typically mean with insertion loss.
Okay. And the next question is, how do you compare the reliability of an X2 film capacitor and an X2 ceramic safety capacitor? I guess the question here comes from the fact that ceramic being a bit of a brittle material,
Yes.
how do those two different reliabilities compare across different technologies?
In terms of technology and in terms of reliability, you really cannot get close to a film capacitor. I mean, that's a given because of the self-healing effect and because of the technology itself. There is no, I mean, the main reason or the main danger behind using a ceramic capacitor that a design engineer would have is what about if there is a short that happens? And for any safety capacitor, if there is a short that happens, then that really could lead to catastrophic failure. The chances for shorts to happen in a ceramic capacitor are a lot higher, of course, simply because of the technology as compared to a film capacitor. But at the same time, of course, we have most of our series offerings with our ceramic safety capacitors are really ceramic are the leaded ceramic safety disc capacitors. And because they are leaded, then as compared to an SMD ceramic capacitor, the chances for a short to happen are not really that high as they would be for an SMD solution. And having said that, of course, our SMD safety series, the CAS series, we would pretty soon be also having that series available with flex termination. So if that could increase the reliability and make you feel more safe about your safety capacitor, then that would be also a possibility. But as of now, all I can say is that a film capacitor is the more reliable capacitor technology for a safety capacitor.
Yeah, I guess when you're comparing across technologies, you can say that one is more reliable than the other, but really also, I guess, Pranjal, when you look at it in absolute sense, both
Yes.
of those numbers are really small in and of themselves.
Yes, of course, of course. But if you have to really compare, I mean, what really makes a safety capacitor called a safety capacitor, not a usual capacitor? That's because it could really be at times maybe dangerous for the end user
Yeah.
if there is some catastrophic failure that happens. And to mitigate that failure, of course, there are many ways. I mean, you're looking at ways to mitigate that. And film capacitors, they have because of the self-healing effect. And I'm sure there have been many webinars and many presentations that we've given on self-healing effect. That's what really makes it uh, the more to be trusted technology. But having said that, as you rightly said, of course, the numbers for ceramics are also not high at all to make us raise any eyebrows if that could be or could not be a
Yeah.
right offering.
All right. Last question here. Do you offer the components listed as a whole integrated EMI filter, like a power line filter module? I think that's an easy one for you, Pranjal.
Yes, we do. uh, Yes, we do have components which we do offer as a complete EMI line filter solution. If you happen to go to our website, you would for sure find Kemet solutions that you can use as a complete EMI solution. So yes, that is a possibility. But of course, in this webinar, I really wanted to talk more about the individual capacitors and chokes and talk more about the theory and physics. So this was the reason why this was not included here. But yes, we do have that offerings as well.
All right, cool. So if there are any more questions, here on the screen is a list of some of our upcoming webinars. And obviously, if you want to attend any of these, please register on on ec.chemet.com or by clicking the link there on the presentation. We'll send out a follow-up email to this webinar with a link to the recording of this presentation, as well as a link to the material itself. So once again, thank you everyone for joining, and Pranjal, thanks again. Here's Pranjal's contact information. So thank you for joining, and we'll see you in a next webinar.
Sure. Thanks, Wilmer. Thanks for attending, everyone. Bye.
Bye.